thing I want to talk about is when you're mounting wood between centers, if we go over to the whiteboard, please, is thinking about how the grain of the wood is directioned as far as how you're going to mount things to the piece or mount this actually on the lathe. Obviously, we've got our log here, and if for those of you who remember, did anybody take high school biology? Anybody remember high school biology? Okay. All living beings are made of cells. In a tree, in a log, the cells run this direction. Okay? So the cells run that direction. Therefore, when you're cutting in this way, you're cutting into the side grain of the log. Okay? When you're going to try to mount onto a spindle, you're going to put your center into the end grain of the piece of wood. So it's going to be going into the cells in a different direction. Okay? This way, if you were to put screws, say you're mounting this as a bowl, you're going to put screws in it. The screws are going to hold very, very well into this direction, putting the screws into the wood on the side grain. Okay? The screws are not going to hold very well into end grain. There is a trick to do that, and if I get time, I'll talk to you about that as well. But I just wanted to give a quick orientation of how wood actually works and how the cells are arranged, because I think that helps to explain the different pieces and why these different things work out. The other thing is, and I'm sure you all know this and are aware of this, but when you're getting stock for your, or as Julie Hurriet said, timber, does anybody give them free wood? I get a lot of it. Unfortunately, it looks like this. This is not an appropriate piece for spindle turning, okay? Because it's almost all bark, okay? There's maybe, I don't know, maybe a little bit of room in here where I could actually turn a spindle out of that. But I'm going to have to start with it turned off center. This is not a suitable piece for spindle turning. Obviously, a nice solid piece like so would be good for spindle turning, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and pass those around. Okay. When you're going to be doing some spindle turning, obviously you're going to be working with the different kinds of chucks or spurt drives you might be using. Whoops, there we go. The different kind of spur drives you might be using. Now, your lathe is most certainly going to come with one of these two, a spur drive, a 4-point spur drive. I have seen a few 2-point spur drives, but I haven't used those, so if anybody has some input on those. I've always felt the more pieces making contact with the wood, the better. Okay, so I've always felt that was more important. Obviously you can get mini spur drives, so you can see how that's going to work. Obviously that's a very small spur drive. I would use that to start out with a piece of wood that was this size when I started turning it. Okay, because this big spur drive, and I did use a little bit of force to push that in there, but you can see how the big spur drive does not fit on that piece well. It's actually larger than the piece of stock I started with. So the mini spur drive is a good idea on that. The other option for spur drives is a steb center. And you can see it. This is the center point is spring loaded, and it has a lot of teeth that are going to hold onto that piece of wood. I used this for the very first time when we had the demo a couple weeks ago, and where I got to do the turning and made the triangular box. It made me feel a lot more secure to have all those points holding that piece of wood as it was turned off center and spinning in a very odd way. By the way, if you've never turned off center, if your shop is hot, it will make a really nice fan to keep you cool. Because off-center wood makes a really neat fan motion. However, you do have to have some intestinal fortitude to turn off center, because that is spinning very fast. The last kind of drive, as far as the mounts into the headstock, is the safety drive or cup center. The safety drive Merle, where's Merle at? Merle is Mr. Skew Chisel Man. Merle, I learned this stuff from Merle about skew chisels. Safety drive, if you're scared of your skew chisel, use a safety or cup drive, because it'll stop. It's not going to scare you. Now, I did a lot of turning with a spur drive, and turning with a spur drive, and you hit the skew chisel, and it gets a bad catch. What happens? flies right out of the lathe, doesn't it? Well, the safety drive, and this is a one-way safety drive, which I've let sit around and get all rusty, nasty, but it still works okay. But it fits in the Morris taper of your headstock. Now, when I started turning years and years ago, before I actually got back into it, joining the clubs and whatnot, this was the only kind of tailstock center that there was a cup drive. There was no revolving center that my family had access to. Most assuredly, they were out there, because I'm not as ancient as some here. What? Huh? You know, when I started turning, we didn't have to, you know, pump the lathe to do that. But, Jerry. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jerry. The stock has almost made it around. Fantastic. We'll go ahead and talk about one or two more things. So as far as marking stock out, actually I need my square piece of wood back. Okay. The square piece of wood that is suitable for turning, where would it be hiding at? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, what we're going to talk about in this point is about how to mark center on the piece. And marking center is one of those wonderful and fabulous things that there are lots of different ways to mark center on a piece of wood, and I'm sure several of you have seen a lot of different ways. The way that I learned was just find the points on the corners and mark, let's see, and mark between the two corners. And that will get you center because you're using the piece of wood, the shape of the wood, to do that. So there's one. I'm going to switch around and go. Wow, that lined up all by itself. Wow, nice. And that's center on that piece of wood. Now your other option is one that I was taught by a club member here who told me it was John Shackelford's favorite method for marking center. You just use your fingers as a guide and just slide back and forth along the piece of the wood. And you just mark center, or darn close to it. At least as close as it is for where I work. So the other way to mark center is you can buy one of these center finders, or center marks. And now you notice this piece of wood is not entirely square. That happens, whether it's milled professionally or whether I do it on my bandsaw. It may not be completely square. But this mark, and I've seen a lot of people talk about these particular center finders, like, well, it doesn't work. Well, since stock may not be completely square, you have to mark all the way around the piece of wood. Go to all four corners. Now you just found center. Okay, that's how you find center using this particular tool. Because that, I think, is one of the things that is not on the instructions, because when you buy one of these tools, they don't come with instructions. Okay? I just had to kind of learn that one from another wood turner. So, by all means, when the turners are standing around BSing, they might actually know something. So, couple of different ways. I like to actually put a center point into the piece of wood before I start. You can use an awl. I made this one in the Wood Turning Club as a Judy Chestnut project years and years ago. You just kind of get it there, start it. Okay, and I did mark my point there. Now, the other way to do it is to use a spring-loaded center punch. And I got this at a shop around the corner. And, whoops. And that, did you hear that click? It just uses the center point and marks that down in there. Now, would I be satisfied to go ahead and put that between centers and start turning that piece? Absolutely not. Because I'm cautious. I'm not an accountant like Chip, who's my mentor with turning, but I am cautious. So I believe in the concussive force method to make sure you get that spur drive mounted properly. Now that spur drive is mounted into that piece of wood. But I'm going to take it a step further and take it out. Do the same thing on the other side. Using that point that I created earlier. Now, and as you can see from the overhead view, I just created my own marks to where that's going to go, and I've drove that center point a lot deeper. That way it'll start between centers really nicely. So I'm going to use the safety center because I want to scare everybody with the skew chisel real quick. Before I get into that other part, I'm going to talk about the tailstock briefly. Everybody, when they bought their lathe or got their lathe that came with a tailstock, looked a lot like this. Okay, that's the pretty standard one that comes on most of the lathes nowadays. The more expensive lathes, similar to this model, they actually come with a different revolving or live center. And that revolving and live center, you can feel the difference when you actually spin the two centers because it feels a lot different. So I'm going to go ahead and pass around my live center. I say I will, and then I can't find it. Okay, I'll grab one off another lathe. Or would someone grab one off one of the other lathes, one of these kinds, so I can actually go ahead and do my demo? Perfect. You're probably going to have to screw that back out there. Okay. Here you go. Pass the two around together. And the big difference between those two live centers is the bearings. When you take the hold of the Morris tape in your hand and spin it, you will be able to feel the difference in the bearings. Because just spinning in your hand, you'll be able to feel how smooth the bearings are. Now, does that really matter if you're going to be a weekend warrior? Well, I don't know. That depends on what you think. I know it made me feel a lot more confident in my turning when I did that. So I'll mount it on the safety drive there. And the other end here. Get that nice and tight. Mount this up to where it gets up against that safety drive. And where am I at? Okay. Whoop. Oh, thank you so much, sir. That's perfect. Thanks a lot. Okay. Well, how many of you move your tool rest while the lathe is actually spinning? No? Somebody will admit to it, right? You know, that's what happens when you have a safety drive in and you move it up against there. That's the beauty of a safety drive. Okay? Isn't that the nice part about it? Yeah, I just made a horrific mistake and shouldn't have done that. It also, the safety drive will teach you how to take light cuts. Took me a really long time to figure out that a light cut was okay. I started out in the wood turning theory and philosophy of the faster and more material you can remove, the better. That's not necessarily the case depending on what you're turning. So we're going to pretend I went ahead and turned that all the way around, and I got my skew chisel out. Anybody here ever had a catch with a skew chisel? I'm expecting to have my first one tonight. So, you know, I stick it in there, and that skew chisel just got a bad catch. But that safety drive just kept me from being scared to death. Okay? So that's the beauty of it, in which this was already dull, so I don't need to worry about sharpening it now. But I can get in there and do whatever skew chisel cuts I want to, and if I get a catch, it's not a problem. Okay? That's the beauty of the safety drive. And I would recommend anyone who's trying to help a child learn how to use a skew chisel, get a safety drive so it doesn't scare the dickens out of them. Because a one bad catch with a skew chisel and this piece of wood goes and does that at them as opposed to away from them, and it's going to scare them. Okay? Thank you very much, Jim. All right. Now, another thing about the wonderful lathes that we have, we all have the wonderful punch-out bar to get the heads or the items out of here. And everybody here is familiar with a Morris taper, right? So you know that's the Morris taper of the actual piece. This is a Morris taper number 2. There are Morris taper number 1s and Morris taper number 3s. I haven't seen many Morris taper number 3s on wood turning lathes. Most of the time when I see those, they're on big metal turning lathes that are really spinning some heavy metal stock. Now, I actually won this in a wood turning club raffle one time. This is a Morris taper clean out tool. Do you have to have one of these? No, because for the most part your finger will fit up in there and you can clean that out. Or a good air compressor will clean that out. But you just kind of get in there, clean it once in a while. You know, just get the chips and the nasty stuff out of there. Use your finger to do it. Use a paper towel that you've twisted up and just kind of get in there and root around a little bit and keep that thing clean. is that's what happened to this tool here. I left it in the lathe a really long time on this number 2 Morris taper on this one, and there was enough condensation, enough moisture in my garage that it rusted inside my Morris taper. So, and I didn't know that. So I always, as a rule of thumb now, take my drive centers or live centers out of my lathe when I quit for the day, because I have this problem with rusty tools. It's just a personal issue, I guess. The other thing, or while I'm talking about things that go in the Morris taper, is the drill chuck. We've all seen drill chucks, right? And this is just the standard, or Jacob's chuck, whatever you want to call it. This one uses a key. I tried once to use one that didn't use a key, that was just a hand tightening, and I never felt like I got it tight enough because the drill bit kept spinning in it when I was trying to use it. So that's when I decided that I needed to switch out and go to one with a key. Luckily, I'd only got it at the store recently, so I was able to take it back. The other thing is, keys get lost. Okay? One of the greatest inventions ever is the rare earth magnet. Anybody here got any rare earth magnets in their shop? Anybody made any fridge magnets ever? I think the rare earth magnet is a beautiful thing. I haven't lost that key yet since I started using the rare earth magnet. That key is always with the chuck. And then, you know, when I'm using it, it's always nearby and handy. If I drop it, it lands on something metal and it will hold. So the rare earth magnet was definitely a worthwhile purchase. The other thing I made for work holding, because I'm forgetful, I got to have things within arm's reach when I'm turning. I mean, I have a rolling cart that I roll over here beside me, then roll it back out of the way when I'm done. Because if it's not within arm's reach, I probably won't do it, and I'll get mad and say a choice word or two. So I bought a magnetic parts tray. You can get them in any auto parts store, around the corner of that discount tool shop. You throw stuff into that magnetic parts tray, it stays there. My brother, he's got his magnetic parts tray mounted right on the side of the lathe, because the magnet's so strong it'll hold stuff no matter which way, what direction it is. He actually has been known to throw a nut or bolt or something down against it and it just sticks on it. So it's just a great way to keep things handy. It's not work holding on the lathe, but it's a way that you can keep things at fingertip distance. Now, another item with the drill chuck, you can use the drill chuck itself to actually chuck items into and use it as a holding device. Because I know several people here have turned these kind of spinning tops. You know, so that's actually using the drill chuck as a spinning top or as a holder. Now, the other thing, there it is. And you may want to take out the center point if you're going to hold this stock, because you'll never get that point lined up just right into that top. Okay? But what you can do is take the point out, and now there it came. You have to be real careful how you do that, because it might fly out and stick in your hand. You don't want that point sticking in your finger, okay, or your side or whatever else. But remember, that's one of the advantages of that upgrade chuck, is you can actually get it up there and use it in that dowel to hold that dowel, as opposed to trying to do that some other way. That makes this live center into an actual cup center. So it takes the point out of it. Another item, this tool is used for that, but also it can be used to actually stop that, so that becomes a true cup center. I actually watched Danny Moreno up in the Northland shop at his Turnabout Wood store. He actually drove a nail in there, or got a nail in there, then used a pair of pliers and bent the nail over, and used this as a drive center, because he needed one extra drive center, one extra safety drive for a class. I was very impressed. I didn't think it was a really great way to use the tailstock, especially I know how much those one-way tailstocks cost. Another advantage of that particular kind of tailstock is you can mount different size cones on it. You have to put this in first, obviously, to lock that in place so you can screw that on. But those little goblets over there, I'm going to borrow somebody's. Was this yours, Richard? Okay, I'm going to borrow yours for just a sec. That's right, he can always make another one. You're absolutely right. Check the price tag on it. But when you get this up here, we're going to pretend this was in a chuck or mounted in center here or something. What we would do is bring this nose up. I like to put a paper towel or something between it so that it can actually hold on to that and kind of give that a little bit more support. Of course, I'd take that out before it's turning. But that's how that would work. to support that piece while you're trying to turn that thin stem. Because if this nice goblet shape here is just hanging out in midair, it's going to start to shake, especially the thinner and thinner you get. And then you'll have a fantastic reaction when it flies off the lathe and you think, oh, I got to make another one. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. You get to spend more time at the lathe. You make that decision. So, okay, moving on to faceplate turning. Actually, one other thing before I do that is pin chucks. Has anybody here got a pin chuck or use a pin chuck at home regularly? Okay. I just found them as an option, and I kind of like pin chucks. They're pretty handy. So the pin chuck, what it is it mounts into your drill chuck, or some chuck, or I mean into your piece, and then you put a pin down into the, can we see the overhead, please? Thank you. And there's a pin right here that moves back and forth. You can kind of see that moving back and forth there. Then you mount the piece, this is one I've already turned, over the pin chuck. Kind of got to get that straight. Slide it on up on there. Whoop! And he didn't tighten down his drill chuck. So you slide that on there, and then you twist it away from you. Let's see, that'd be clockwise until it locks there. Now you can turn that piece, and it'll hold on to that piece of wood solidly. Because remember, as it's coming around, since you put it on clockwise, you're going to be cutting against the way that it's holding. So it's going to be okay. Now, when I was playing with this the other day, the really cool part about the pin chuck was that I took this off and thought, you know, I really need to put that back on the lathe and check it out. I put it back on there, and it centered itself to the point that I didn't have to put a tool to it again to make it round once more. That really impressed me, because I hate trying to get things back in center after I've taken them off the lathe once. Okay, last thing as I get this taken out of here, talking about spindle work, is you have that Morris taper in there. I already talked about what a Morris taper was. Your other options in turning with a Morris taper is to actually make items that fit directly into your Morris taper. So I actually turned these out of some beautiful Osage orange, and this is what I use to put my pins together. A lot of you out there are pin makers and whatnot. You probably built one of those neat little sled things and all to put your pins together. Well, I was too cheap to buy one of those sled things or try to make one myself. So I just made one of these for the headstock and one for the tailstock, and I used a precision machine that I already owned to actually press my pins together, rather than trying to do it some other way. The only thing I would warn you, if you're going to do that, make sure you have a good knockout bar, because wood does not like to come out of your Morris tapers. Because wood tends to be very attracted to metal and sticks really well. And make sure that your punch-out bar will come in from the tailstock too, because you've got to be able to punch that tailstock one out as well. That works on my Delta Mini lathe the same way it does on my Jet at home. So that's those parts. Let's see, next part, faceplates. You can get faceplates in every different size you can imagine, and for every different size of lathe that there is. Faceplates are everywhere out there. These two, the blue and red one, are aluminum faceplates. This is the heavy-duty faceplate that came with my lathe. It weighs a ton. Okay. This is a piece of wood I mounted on the faceplate using screws. I did want to point out that I couldn't get these screws to tighten down on this piece. And it's because I used flat screws. And I was really hoping this would happen when I tried to put this all together. I've not had good luck trying to use nut drivers or flat screws to secure works to faceplates. So I always use Phillips or square drive screws. I'm too cheap to buy the square drive screws, so Phillips it is for me. I would warn you about using drywall screws. By all means, if you feel safe using drywall screws, but they look a little bit flimsy to me and feel flimsy to me. One other item on faceplates that I was out researching on the internet, and there was a gentleman in, I believe it was England, in one of the wonderful wood turning magazines, who actually used a faceplate with screws mounted, considering those screws are actually going through the faceplate as opposed to on the sides, where the screws were actually inside the holes, and they used that as a drive center for unusual shaped stock like burls and things like that. They used this just as a spur drive with the screws. I mean, that's another option. I hadn't thought to use it, but I certainly wouldn't use that much of the screw sticking out, maybe a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, 3/8. Jim, I have some handouts if you want to go ahead and hand those out. Looking at what time it is. No, these right here. I only have 65 copies, so good turnout tonight. Okay. Now, for those of you who do have chucks at home, to actually use chucks to mount your pieces to the lathe, there are several different chucks available on the market. There's the one I'm looking for. Different brand names, Novas. Technitool makes the Nova, I think, right, or something. Anyway, there's one way, and I think it kind of depends on what chuck you learned on as the one you believe is the appropriate chuck to use. Okay, I kind of was introduced into chucks by people who were one-way users, so I thought one-ways were best. I've seen people do amazing things with whatever chuck they have. There's also screw chucks that actually mount into the end of the chuck itself. You can see that would be sitting back inside of there. And that piece would then go into a hole that you've drilled into your workpiece, depending upon whatever specs your chuck say of hole to drill. So that's how that part would mount. Other thing is glue blocks. And I have a glue block here to show, because I was afraid I would run out of a little bit of time here. And this is a glue block that I've put on a faceplate, obviously. I faced off the front of it, of the glue block itself. And then what I did was I put concentric rings. I put rings around the front of the faceplate so that you can actually have a place to line your piece of work up on. Okay? Learned that from the wood turning demos that were being done for the kids at the AAW here in Kansas City. Thought that was probably the best tip I got out of that whole demo show. Was, hey, that's a really great way to line stock up onto the glue block. For those of you who are still getting into kind of how do you cut out your bowl blanks and so on, you can get a fancy pair of calipers, or you can cut some cardboard circles. This is a cardboard circle for an 8-inch bowl. Okay? You can also make your own compass. I made a nice little compass here. There we go, so you can read it. And right there to that pencil hole marks a 10-inch circle. Put a nail or something like that, just in a piece of cardboard, use your ruler to mark that out. Then I put little marks. That'll draw an 8-inch bowl. That'll draw a 6-inch bowl, 1 inch in. Because you remember, you're going around the diameter all the way around the piece. So you don't have to have some fancy compass if you don't want to spend the money on it. Let's see. And then, okay, let me get back to the chucks. There are lots of different size jaws for your chuck. Do you have to have every size jaw for your chuck? Heck no. I happen to be lucky enough to actually luck into a chuck. The guy was selling that he had all the jaws for his one-way stronghold chuck. Every jaw. So I obviously got that. Now, two different ways. I haven't really talked about chucks much, but chucks can either expand out, or they can expand out into a recess, or they can compress down onto something. This is a bowl that I made in a class here. My chuck apparently needs oil that's squeaky. So, but you know what they say about squeaky wheels, right? So, okay. So, that jumbo jaw is just expanded out into that bowl. I can now turn the bottom of that bowl and finish that piece off. I was visiting with some folks last time for the club meeting, and they said they have the jumbo jaws, but they still don't trust them. So they use electrical tape around the piece. And they just don't cover the center marks where they want to actually do the cutting. And that holds it onto the chuck really, really nice. And that way they feel they can work with confidence. And that's kind of what this is about. Everybody's going to knock bowls off the lathe. It's always going to happen. But if you can find some way of holding the work that makes you feel more confident that you're not going to blow it off the lathe, all the better, obviously. Because anybody here play golf? You won't admit it? Okay. I rarely admit that I play golf too, but in wood turning is like golf. You get one good cut every time you do some wood turning, and guess what? You'll do it again. Okay? You'll go back out and try one more time. Now, pretend these rubber bumpers were actually out here further. I could actually expand that out around this bowl, because this will go out a little bit further. This is a pretty good sized bowl for this one, but in that case, what you would use is a jam chuck. Where I have an example of a jam chuck I've created, pretending this would actually fit into the jaws of my chuck, and it does when I have the other jaws on this chuck. And what it is, then I would mount the bowl like so, with that, like a pad of paper like it was before, up against there, and bring the tailstock up. And you have to do a little bit of work to kind of get that lined up so it matches correctly. And that's kind of the trick in wood turning I found when I was first starting out, was how do you line that up? Well, there's a couple different ways to line it up. You can buy the fancy stuff and line it up that way, or you can make your own. I found a lot of wood turners are very ingenious people, and this is my example of the one that I made based upon what I saw, and it fits into that 1x8. I made this on the lathe, and there's a nail here. I just take the nail with a hammer, slam it through there into the bottom of the bowl. Okay, this chuck is a really long body, so it's not like my one-ways. But I slam that in the bottom, and that makes a perfect point right down the center of that bowl. So when I flip that bowl around up here onto the lathe on that jam chuck, I have a perfect center point already marked. All I have to do is line it up a little bit between which way is level. So that gives me a center point. But obviously, like I said, you can actually buy the wherever I set that down at now. You can actually buy the center point. Ah, there it is. That goes through that fits and goes through your chuck and actually pops in there, to where you actually use this nice long center point. But that's up to you. The other piece that I want to talk about briefly are spindle steadies. Should you be doing long spindle work, and you are bowl work or vase work, I know Russ does a lot of vases and whatnot in hollow forms. I know there are also a lot of other hollow form makers here. What you do is you use this piece with these big wheels on it, and it actually will hold the piece solid while you do your turning, and you're cutting inside of this. Chip, I believe this one you got at John Shackelford's sale. So that's in that, and you make the piece down at the bottom to fit your lathe bed and how that's going to sit in there. Of course, that's a homemade version. You can also buy spindle steadies. This one in particular is a bowl steady, and it actually sits out on the back edge. Because in bowls, when you're cutting and need the extra protection, is when you're cutting inside. So you need the force on the back side of the bowl, so it'll help to hold it. So you'll actually be, as you're cutting with your bowl gouge, you'll be cutting in like so, cutting into that bowl. Well, that gives you the weight and the protection to where that up against that. Now with spindles, you're going to mount the spindle steady the other direction. Boy, do I have a lot of tools up here now, huh? It feels good. Okay, anyway, so you get this up here, and of course, obviously, this will be lowered down to fit the right thing. These are both made by the One Way Corporation. And the spindle would be like, for instance, this little spindle here. You can see that's a fairly weak spindle. I mean, I can twist that and wiggle that around, because this is my very first example of spindle turning. Very first time I ever tried to practice doing spindle turning. And I still have it, because it's a reminder of I'm still not that good a spindle turner. But I have improved a wee bit. Anyway, so that's to hold like the really thin spindles. You can see how they're kind of, the wheels are turning there. Here's the other one. Here's these last two items I want to show. Okay. Last couple items here is a collet chuck. Whoops. This is a collet chuck that actually expands out into the piece to hold it. And Chip was telling me this evening when he brought this for me to use this as an example. He had one that was, what'd you say, Chip 2 5/8, 2 3/8, and he turned a lot of really big bowls on in an expansion chuck, in an expansion mode, with a chuck just like this. Chip nobody told him he needed anything different. Well, if you get the larger jaws on the chuck, and there's a lot of people out there that are preaching about getting larger jaws on chucks, and you know that's totally up to you. That's about erring on the side of caution. I rarely turn any bowls over about 12 inches, so I don't really run into any issues of needing the really big jaws on my chuck. There are also 3-jaw chucks, like this one. You can see here it's only got 3 jaws. You already have to have your stock round to mount into a 3-jaw chuck. If you have a 4-jaw chuck, you can actually mount square stock into the jaws of the chuck. Rick brought this, so I feel I have to show it. Rick Bywater brought this. This is an Escalon, okay, an Escalon chuck. It's a chuck specifically designed to do off-center turning and off-center work. It's got all kinds of nifty little adjustment knobs on it you can see, so you can shape it and move it exactly the way you want to move it. Rick is an expert on this chuck, so if you have any questions, ask him, because it's his chuck. Rick told me to take it and figure it out. Huh? I bet Rick would sell it to you for $110. Okay, last item, I'm just going to talk about this very, very briefly, is vacuum chucking. Oh, I decided to stay on the lathe. Ah. Okay, you can make your own vacuum chucking system. I bought the pieces here to make the actual vacuum seal because I'm lazy and didn't want to go to the trouble to try to come up with all the hardware and whatnot. Toilet plunger? Yeah, something like that, didn't it, huh? Then you have to, of course, you order this piece. It goes through your headstock. Right on through there. Can you see the end there? Yep, you can see the end. Good, good. You put this on here, tighten that down. Oops, I did it backwards. And vacuum chucking, I've heard some people tell me when I was asking last month whether or not they actually do the vacuum chucking. They actually use the vacuum chuck to hollow out the bowl. That seems not on the side of caution to me. I'm not saying it won't do it. High risk, good point. That's the perfect word for that, Rick. Thank you. High risk, yeah, very good idea. Notice I just wiggled that a little bit more to get an even better seal. And then what you do, you want to finish off that bottom of that bowl and make that look real pretty, right? Turn on the vacuum chuck here. You can't really hear it. I mean, it's very quiet. And then that holds that bowl right up on there. And you can, I still bring the tailstock up to hold it, to get it started. But I can't pull that off there. Okay? I'm not going to try to break my bowl either to find out. But take that vacuum off. Come on, loosen up. There it goes. Came right off there. So that's vacuum chucking. You can make your own system, or you can buy one. One last item on chucks. I just remembered I was going to talk about this because I thought it was very important, but I didn't get to it. When you're cutting your spigot for making your chuck, okay, say this is your headstock right here. There's your spindle coming out of your headstock right here. Well, you're getting ready to do, and here's your chuck on it, okay, and all your chuck have those nice little jaws that come down here, like so. So they have those nice little jaws on it. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that if you're going to expand into it, that you have your piece of wood as you're making your spigot on the back of your bowl or on the inside of your bowl or wherever you're making it, that you get where that comes around here to go inside there. So that's your bowl coming in here. You want to make sure that you have a good 90 right at that point, because you want the flat jaws, this part here, the flat of that, to be resting against good solid wood. So you want a 90 coming from this point right up onto that. Okay, that's what's going to give you your strength in the chuck. Because if you have a piece mounted, for instance, well, there's the key for that one. See all the toys you got to deal with when you're wood turning? Okay. So you've got that mounted in there, okay? Tighten that one on down. Okay, so that's mounted in there. And what you want to look for is whether or not you have any gaps up in here between your chuck jaws. Okay, I did a pretty good job getting that into 90 because that's flat against those jaws. Okay, that's going to give me a lot of strength this way, because remember, when you start cutting on it, you're making torque. So it's going to torque one way or the other. Okay, so and if you're going to try to do one of those goblets like Richard made look so nice, and all the other people who made goblets during that class, or those thin stems, you want that holding up here really tight. So make sure you get a good 90 degree angle from here to here. Let me show that to you all again just so you can see that one more time. And that's whether you're doing a glue block, a faceplate, or a block in there, but you want to have a good 90 there. Even a little bit extra where this part down here is dovetailed, this part of the piece of wood down here is dovetailed, that's okay, but you still want a good 90 right up there on that edge. So you get a nice flat for that chuck jaws to rest against. And that's whether that's on the interior where you're expanding into the piece or you're clamping down onto the workpiece. Okay? I think that's the most safe way to use those chucks. I was having a heck of a time when I first started using my chuck. I got my tax refund a few years ago and bought me a chuck. I didn't know what the heck I was doing, so I started asking around. Couldn't really get a good answer on how that worked. And finally I took a class. You know, hey, I took a class, right? Spent a few bucks, came to class, and learned about how to make that jaw, and I have not had any trouble since. Now, I'm not saying I haven't blown things off the lathe. I've had some spectacular crashes when things fall apart. But the bowl didn't come loose at the chuck. It blew up because there was an unknown crack in the piece of wood. And I want to thank everybody for staying past 9 o'clock. And if there are any questions, I'll be glad to entertain those. But thanks so much, everybody. Okay.
Have a safe trip home. Take care.